Second Continental Congress moved towards independence. The colonial militias had already been fighting with the British Army for over a year, but most colonists still wanted to avoid a war with Britain. They hoped to work out things between King George III and the 13 colonies. Even after the fighting started, most colonists were still not in favor of declaring independence and were still loyal to the king. Common Sense by Thomas Paine. In January of 1776, Thomas Paine, a writer who had moved to the 13 colonies from Britain, wrote a pamphlet titled Common Sense. The pamphlet gave reasons why the 13 colonies should separate from Britain. First, Common Sense said that it didn't make much sense for a huge continent like North America to be governed by a little island nation like Britain. Therefore, the 13 colonies should become independent of Britain and create their own country. Second, it was foolish for colonists in North America to have to ask people thousands of miles away simple questions about how they should run things, and then have to wait months to get the answer back from Britain. Remember, they didn't have phones back then, and would have to do everything by mail and by ship. Third, the blood of the men killed in Lexington and Concord cried out that it was time to leave the control of Britain, because Britain was still trying to dominate the colonists. The effect. The way Common Sense was written convinced many colonists that they should not be loyal to King George III and that they should fight to be independent from Britain. Paine said that the colonists' common sense showed them that they had the right to rule themselves. The pamphlet Common Sense sold 500,000 copies in 6 months. That was enough copies to put one copy in about half the homes in the 13 colonies. Almost everyone read the pamphlet and talked about what to do. Before the pamphlet was written, only the radicals were seriously thinking about breaking away from Britain's rule. Common Sense caused more people to begin thinking about becoming independent from Britain. The more people talked about independence, the more people came to think of it as a good idea. Colonists came to the realization that things were not going to get better between the 13 colonies and Britain. Common Sense helped turn the colonists against King George III and toward independence. A resolution for independence. By June of 1776, many of the colonial leaders in the Second Continental Congress were ready to declare the 13 colonies independent of Britain. On June 7, 1776, Richard Henry Lee, a Virginian delegate, introduced a resolution for independence. A resolution is a formal written suggestion. The delegates of the Second Continental Congress debated for several days about Lee's independence resolution. Before voting on the independence resolution, the Second Continental Congress appointed a committee to write out a declaration or a statement explaining why the 13 colonies should no longer be part of Britain. The members of the committee were Benjamin Franklin of Pennsylvania, John Adams of Massachusetts, Roger Sherman of Connecticut, Robert Livingston of New York, and Thomas Jefferson of Virginia. That statement of the reasons why the 13 colonies should be separate from Britain was called the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence was written like a letter to the other countries of the world, telling them why the 13 colonies wanted to break away from Britain's rule and set up their own government. Thomas Jefferson was the one who wrote most of the Declaration of Independence. The debate. When the committee brought the Declaration of Independence to the Second Continental Congress, there was much debate about it. Voting for the Declaration of Independence would be considered treason against Britain and King George, and treason was punishable by death. Therefore, the members decided that the vote to pass the Declaration of Independence must be unanimous. Everybody would have to vote yes. The delegates from New York abstained. That means they did not vote. On July 4th, 1776, the rest of the Second Continental Congress voted to approve the Declaration of Independence. The vote for independence was called unanimous because all the delegates that participated in the vote voted for the Declaration of Independence to be approved. On July 4th, 1776, the Second Continental Congress sent the Declaration of Independence to the world, stating the 13 colonies were no longer part of Britain. That's why we celebrate Independence Day every July 4th. Instead, the colonies would be known as the United States of America. The text of the Declaration of Independence will be read to you later. After the Declaration of Independence was written, there was no turning back for the colonial leaders. The Declaration of Independence declared the 13 colonies were independent of Britain. It is important to understand that the Declaration of Independence had created the United States of America in writing only. In Britain's eyes, the 13 colonies still belonged to Britain. The colonists who wanted their freedom from Britain now had to fight and win a war to make the words of the Declaration of Independence come true. Summary. The 13 colonies declared their independence from Britain in 1776. The problem was Britain was dominating the 13 colonies by forcing them to follow all British laws. The solution was for the Second Continental Congress to consider a resolution for independence from Britain. A committee, headed by Thomas Jefferson, wrote the Declaration of Independence saying the 13 colonies were free of British rule. The effect was the United States of America was created on July 4th, 1776, but the colonists still needed to fight for their freedom. The problem was a people's rights problem. The solution was to accommodate by writing the Declaration of Independence. And the effect was that the problem continued because Britain wasn't going to let them go without a fight.